to review what has been happening over the week, politically speaking, and not just politically speaking, but generally stories that have made headlines this week. And, well, to quickly reintroduce the panel that I have, to my immediate left, I have Dr. Sam Kamau, and I also have Bernard Wakoli, basically to go through some of the events that have been taking place. Now, one of the things that we didn't look at on the newspaper review is the headline on the Daily Nation, which says 1.5 billion Cityland scam claims its first casualties. But I don't want us to just look at this as an isolated story, but generally the war on graft, because this week we also had Kenya Power bosses arraigned in court. They managed to get bail for some of them. But Bernard, your thoughts on whether we finally have a step in the right direction, in the cogwheel of moving towards fighting graft?
Yeah, Mike, I think we are feeling the spirit of that, that Kenyans are now determined to eradicate corruption.
And by Kenyans here, we mean the executive, really, because where does it fall? Where does the buck stop?
You know, the Kenyans, I mean the general public, because if you look at the social media, Twitter, where everybody's, you know, in support of this war against corruption. And in this regard, I also want to commend the DPP. I think it's doing a great job that any good, you know, willing Kenyan should actually support what he's doing. And corruption generally, as in when you look at it in terms of individuals who have been found or who have been suspected, these are high-ranking Kenyans, high-ranking officials. And for the DPP to go for them is something that we need to appreciate. But one thing that we should be conscious about is now the turn that is trying to take on political, you know, angle. We have seen now when the people from the Kenya Power and Lighting Company were arrested.
So those who are saying that it's our people have been targeted.
Politicians from Rift Valley saying it's our people who are being targeted. It's now politics about 2022. I want to remind Kenyans about the statement that Uhuru Kenyatta, the president of Kenya, said the other day, that corruption is an individual. It takes individual burden. It does not tag along or pull along a community. And let us not have this mentality that once somebody is arrested, then it's us who are being targeted.
And Dr. Kamau, maybe just for you to weigh in on this, we do expect that it would be politicized at some point. And I think, I don't remember who it was, but somebody said that when you fight corruption, corruption fights back.
Yeah. Maybe I would want to start with stories about corruption in Kenya have been very discouraging for the longest time. And I know there was a sense in which people are almost giving up, you know, is it really possible? But we have seen with the new reforms, especially by bringing in, you know, the office of the DPP and also the changes in the office of the DCI, there is this renewed fight and there's a sense in which it's creating hope. Even the headline is actually encouraging. When you say that the scam claims its first casualties, it means that there is more. So I think we have seen significant progress in the fight against corruption. And one of the things we have learned in terms of the initiatives that have been there, it requires a multi-pronged approach. It is not just one. It's not just prosecutions. It's those things we are talking about. We talk about lifestyle audit. One of the most significant things is because most of the corruption is around the area of procurement, by making public details, you know, the process with the companies that won, the companies that tendered and all that, creating more transparency. These are some of those initiatives. When you talk about recovery, when you talk about the lifestyle audit, when you talk about, for example, now, those who thought that they can always hide their money in the Swiss banks and New Jersey, those options are not there. So many of the measures that we are talking about right now is about protecting future monies. You know, it's about protecting money it's about protecting future development. Some money may have already been lost, and maybe perhaps we are not going to be able to recover all of them, but they are a step in the right direction. Now, the worrying thing is, in Kenya, the easiest way to defeat anything is to politicize it. So that when you say, remember the issue of Mau evictions back in the days, and it has come back again. When you politicize that issue, even something that is well-intended and is supposed to be helpful to the nation, then it scatters the whole thing. Now, we have seen repeated attempts to politicize, you know, this fight against corruption by saying somebody is targeted. For me, the question is, yes, let's even assume that somebody has been targeted, but are these people involved in corruption. Did actually corruption, take place in Kenya Power? Before we say that they are being targeted, was money lost? Did the public, lose money? And I think that is where we must keep the focus on. The DPP, the DCI, the president, all the people who are involved must ignore the noise and actually continue. And we are hoping, because it seems to be the trend every weekend, we see new indictments, or maybe we see new names released and arrested. We hope the same.
And of course, there's also the question now of arresting on Fridays, and which came up. And of course, there are those who say that, look, the state is using its machinery to embarrass, to target, to... so there was even politicians who came out and said we should amend the law specifically not to arrest on Friday. Your thoughts, Bernard?
You can't dictate on when somebody should be arrested, If we say somebody, okay, we make laws that Fridays people should not be arrested, then people will be committing crimes on Friday. Because knowing that very well, that once I commit
those
to
who
these
are
crimes,
pushing for that are doing that because of the, the big names that we've seen
because
arrested.
of those big names. But you can't legislate on when somebody can be, or how somebody can be arrested. That we leave that to the police service and DCI. They know when and how.
The law,
and
has
the Constitution.
that
okay, so
No. I was going to say there's no special treatment. For example, Mike, if you commit a crime today on a Friday, most likely will be arrested today. Now, when you talk about treating these people in a humane manner, did they also treat Kenyans in a humane manner when they were actually defrauding state coffers? My point would be, as long as there are no violations, because everybody, the presumption of innocence until proved otherwise, must be protected. But in terms of making noise that this is an attempt to embarrass people by arresting them maybe on Friday and all that, it is neither here nor there. It's creating unnecessary noise. What we have seen is, and I think a number of people, like the people who have now mentioned around the Ruaraka land scam and the other issues that are being investigated, right now they are afraid. Even the governors, you saw them coming together saying that they want immunity. They have actually suddenly realized that this fight against corruption is serious, and I think if we continue making this progress, because previously it will be step aside, investigation start, court cases that are frustrated and we never get anywhere. But for now, we have actually seen measures that seem to be working, and therefore I still insist we need to ignore the naysayers, we need to ignore those people who are making noise around these issues. The DPP, the DCI, and other people, and the EACC, because, for example, now on the issue of the Ruaraka land scam, they seem now to be pulling up their socks after being accused of incompetence. We actually want to see more investigations, we want to see more prosecutions, we want to see also convictions of those people who are found culpable, and most important, we also want to see recovery, of public assets, because again, it's not enough for somebody to be indicted or somebody to be jailed if we are not going to recover the money.
Mike, I think in Kenya, people should learn to take full responsibility. And full responsibility, I mean 100% responsibility on your action as an officer in charge of public resources. And again, I'll want to request the president not to be appointing or reappointing those people who have been, mentioned in these scams or in these corruption deeds. Because the other day we saw the name of Ben Chumo being mentioned as one of the, proposed chairperson of Salaries and Remuneration Commission. And the following day, he's arrested for corruption. Does it mean that the president does not have, is not provided with information, or NIS does not provide the president with background checks on some of these appointees? Because there are so many people who have been mentioned in scams whose cases have not been dispensed. But you see them being reappointed again in very plumb positions, as if Kenyans, Kenya is short of people who are qualified. So the president should be doing serious background checks on any person being appointed or nominated to hold a public office.
And now, while we're still on corruption, definitely Kenyans may have a good feel about what is happening, but this needs to percolate down to the very bottom in terms of dealing with corruption. Dr. Kamau, do you feel that if this, fight continues as it's continuing, then it'll percolate to a point where even the normal mwananchi who's set to bribe a police officer or maybe made to bribe in a county office, that would also stop?
Well, what is significant about this is that, you know, for the longest time, like EACC, when they gave their report the other day, the people who were prosecuting was somebody who was given a bribe of 2,000 shillings, 3,000 there. The fight against corruption has to start from the top. You remember, you always used to talk about big fish versus small fish. If we start from the top, and in this sense now we have seen, you know, those kinds of efforts. Now, the issue, for example, of the procurement officers and the accounting, you know, heads in the various departments, because these are the people who are normally used by the powerful to facilitate corruption. Again, if we deal with it at this level, for example, they were required to step aside. They are going to go through some procedure of vetting. If we are able to properly implement this, then this discourages corruption at the lower levels. And we hope that we can actually get now, maybe I want to explain something. It's always said that out of 100 people, there are 20 who are fundamentally, pathologically corrupt. They will always be corrupt, 20. Another 20%, they are incorruptible. Then there is 60% who can be swayed in either direction. Now, the anti-corruption measures target the 60% who can be swayed either direction to make sure that they do not participate in corruption. That is why the other thing that EACC is supposed to do is also part of educating the public, mobilization, creating awareness around this issue. Because these 20 who are fundamentally corrupt and cannot change, if we create if we are able to deny them the environment, the atmosphere that encourages their actions, eventually we can win. Because there are people who will always be corrupt, and then the 20% were incorrupt. But this 60% were majority of us, because you have to remember, the ordinary person, they are not corrupt because either they have not found an opportunity, it has not come their way, and that is why perhaps they have not done that. But if we can have now, beyond just the prosecutions, beyond now the legal approach, it's also a mindset change. It's also trying to now talk about the younger generation. One of the complaints that has been coming up is that most of the young people want to pursue, you know, degrees and careers in procurement because they have seen perhaps that is where, you know, we are talking about entrepreneurs because that is where the money is. But I think also a culture change and a mindset change around that to make sure that we also protect majority of people from now being, you know, drawn into the corruption scam.
Yeah, right. Mike, just to pick up from where where Kamau was left, you know, in Kenya, we talk about value system. Everybody, as in, we talk about let us change our values, let us, you know, have these values that will promote anti-corruption mentality and, you know, practices. But having said that, do we put these into practice? Because as Kamau has said, everybody is talking about 60%, but it's more than that. Everybody is just, you know, we talk about a situation where if given opportunity, you'll also engage in that kind of vice. So I think what Ethics and Corruption Commission should do at the moment is really focusing on intervention, but is not looking at the prevention. We need to have these practices of intervention at the lowest level of the pyramid. And at the lowest level, I mean, maybe having education and providing curriculum for ethics at the primary and secondary level, so that as children grow up, they know that this practice is illegal or is the vice brings so much problem to them, not just as a nation, but at the individual level. So that as they grow up, they tend to shy away from this
from that kind of practice. And I want us to look at something else, because you mentioned a word and you talked about taking full responsibility. Now, this is not just on the political plane. We have 9 rhinos that we lost as a country, a huge, huge blow. But we have KWS, who basically is mandated and tasked to take care of that. And this was as they were transposing them from one area to another. The reports that we have so far is that apparently they died from salt poisoning. Dr. Kamau, as much as it is an accident, as much as possibly it was not intentional, they have produced the 9, you know, to prove that the rhinos are there. But your thoughts on taking full responsibility in a case like this?
Now, first, it's a very sad case, especially when you think about the conservation efforts that have been put in place, and considering that we only have about 750, black rhinos in the country, so losing 9, this is very sad. When you look at it, what it appears is an issue of incompetence, more of it, in terms of, did they gather enough information? Was there enough research that would even have looked at the conditions of where they were going, the ecosystem of where they were actually going to take the animals? But the sad bit is that what we have always seen in other countries, when such a thing like this happens, we always see people taking responsibility. Whether it was an accident, we know that there was actually an aspect of negligence, there's an issue of incompetence, and somebody ought to take responsibility. So it is not just trying to explain, because I think by displaying the horns, it's trying to show that this was not an issue of poaching. It's not people who are interested.
To say that,
Yes, it's not enough. Displaying the horns is not enough. The rhinos died. Who should bear the greatest responsibility when it comes to this? And I think that is the culture we actually need to develop as a country. Who failed to do their part? Is it KWS? Is it the ministry? Is it the researchers, or maybe the consultants who are supposed to be involved in this process? The other thing is the issue that they died from salt poisoning is just a theory. That is what they have been saying. We actually need a comprehensive report. What is the final report, which they have said they are going to provide, so that we know, because perhaps that is just a theory to throw us off. Who actually failed in their responsibility? That's a question that actually ought to be answered.
Bernard, your thoughts on the 9 rhinos and
it's very sad, Mike, that at this moment in time we are losing such kind of a number in just a single, within a span of 1 week. It's so sad, given that these rhinos or these wild animals bring in a lot of resources in terms of, tourists coming to see them. And again, it's the pride of Kenya. But as Dr. Kamau has said, nobody is willing to take full responsibility. What happened? People are just trying to explain. But that explaining
the 18 rhino horns
in a functioning democracy, in a functioning system, the first incident that could have happened is somebody stepping aside. In fact, what I expected is to see C.S. Balala coming on TV the day he called for a presser and say, because of what has happened under my docket, I, as the minister or the CS in charge, I want to take full responsibility.
Somebody might ask you whether you live in utopia when it comes to Kenya. That has never happened.
So that investigation can take place. But Balala is saying he has commissioned other independent agencies like DCI, to come and investigate. How do you investigate people that are still in the office? That's the dilemma that we face.
Of course.
People must have stepped aside. Then there's independent investigation. Then those who are found culpable for negligence or or misconduct or commission of or omission of services, these people need to be prosecuted.
Absolutely.
Because it is so bad that we are still, blaming and blaming and blaming. And this again brings us to the scandal of the sugar that is just now fizzling away. And as we bring in the rhino and other, other scandals, now people are forgetting about the sugar and the mercury and the what, these things.
And the rhinos died from salt, as we are dying from sugar.
From sugar that is laced by mercury. People should be ready to take full responsibility, Mike. Because as much as the sugar scandal was so much, the media picked up and, people were talking about it, nobody, till this moment, has taken responsibility. Apart from the KEBS officials who were arrested and the charges that they were arrested on, were not in relation to the lacing of, of sugar with the
sugar. Dr. Kamau, you wanted to weigh in.
I was going to say, to be fair to KWS, they have been involved in translocation of other animals, which has been successful. There is something that went wrong with this particular issue, and we don't want it also to die from the public limelight, because it was supposed to be a major operation. This was just the first batch that was actually, transported, but the incident took place. So perhaps it's learning from this, because I know this is a requirement. It's part of the conservation efforts that they actually need to move some animals from an area maybe where they are concentrated. But in terms of the lessons we learn, because what tends to happen is after the noise dies down because the dust will settle, is that we'll forget about this, and then such an incident happens again in the future. So also being able to learn lessons and see what went wrong. It is very important we first understand what went wrong, who failed in the responsibility, who bears, of course, the responsibility for that and, carries the consequences. But it is important we also learn the lessons so that in the future, when you're involved in a similar operation, then it's done in the right way.
All right, and maybe as we wind up on that, and I would want us to look at politics, but the question of follow-up and ensuring that some of these things are not forgotten. I mean, if we look at corruption, there are many cases we can highlight and say have been left in the back burner. We don't know what happens. You've just brought about sugar, and not that it has died off, but chances are if it continues with the way things are, we may have nobody found culpable. Now, with these rhinos, it may again become a headline story for several days, but something else will come up and we forget about it. Wakoli, as we wind up on this, how do we ensure that people are held culpable for the mistakes that they make and for some things that are life-threatening to us and even to the environment?
The institutions that are charged with the responsibilities of protecting the lives of Kenyans and protecting the resources need to do their work. And corruption, Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission need to do its work. The office of DPP need to do its work. The office of the DCI need to do its work, so that we don't have these cases, coming up. The media highlights an issue, then people talk about it for like 1 month, 2 weeks, as Dr. Kamau is saying, then the dust settles. After that, people forget. And we need to come up with the structures as a country or as a people on follow-up on some of these cases. We need to have a database of all the cases that have been, have been mentioned, and corruption incidents that have been mentioned, so that maybe the president can set up a commission, a follow-up commission of looking just on the dispensed cases, who are the culprits, who are people convicted, how did the cases go, so that Kenyans are kept updated on some of these issues. But if we just highlight, then we talk about it for 1 week, then it fizzles away, then another incident comes up, then we forget about that one. We are in a cycle of rewinding things and making things happen the same way. It's like we don't learn any lesson from what happened.
Part of the reason we are making progress in the fight against corruption is also the role of the media. By also deliberately keeping the spotlight firmly focused on the corruption incidences and the efforts that are going on. And I think this is one of the encouraging things, that actually, a vibrant media playing its watchdog role, then you're able to consistently, especially with the flow of information and access to information, keeping these in the public limelight, looking at issues and not letting them die down. And even when it dies, I think I've been very happy to see some issues revived and again tracking progress. This would be very important. So beyond the government, because even EACC and the other institutions also need to be giving us regular updates, but the media can also help us by firmly keeping this in the spotlight, making it part of the national conversation until we get to such a place and say that finally the dragon of corruption
has been slain.
Is weakening.
Or at least it's weakening, because slaying, it seems, a very tall order. And talking about keeping our eyes on the ball, let us look now at matters politics. And I know you did allude to this earlier on. Why NASA critics won't leave is what the nation has put here. But we do know that at some point we had Moses Wetangula, say that NASA is dead. We had the ODM leader Raila Odinga come out and say, dare him literally, and told him, well, if it is dead, why don't you leave? Again, Wetangula, remember, not too long ago, he's on record having said when he was being thrown out of his Senate seat, saying that it's going to be messy and and
the divorce.
The divorce was going to be messy, but we are still waiting for that mess, if at all there was going to be any. But looking at matters politics, Bernard, is NASA dead? Or rather, let me not even ask if NASA is dead, because I think that we've already discussed. But is there any chance of it being resuscitated? At this point, it looks like it's in the ICU.
NASA can be resuscitated.
Do you think it still has?
Yeah, it has some chances of breathing.
What in it is alive?
The problem we are experiencing, or the problem NASA is experiencing, is external interference.
Really?
And by saying external, is external interference. And external interference here is the principles, the other three principles, have not been given space to consolidate themselves. I'm talking about Kalonzo, Wetangula, and Mudavadi.
What space surely do they need for them to consolidate themselves?
There's this big brother who was part of the coalition and left.
According to him, he's still part of the coalition.
Mike, you can't be eating from both sides of the mouth. You can't be talking, supporting the government, at the same time working as an opposition.
But if that be the case, Bernard, then shouldn't the three get together and say, look, we are cracking the whip and you
But once these three come together and try to consolidate, you see external forces coming in, trying to separate them, meeting it individuals. So, and by doing so, then it's left in a situation of confusion, because the three principles actually are not sure whether the ODM side left and joined the Jubilee or it's still with them, And by doing so, you hear the sentiments. And whoever talks against the other partner, the ODM side, is seen as a betrayer. And Mike, I just want to remind you on the first person to talk about the death of NASA was none other than the former Prime Minister, Raila Odinga. After the swearing, the purported swearing in, he called for NEC at his Orange office house. And he said that NASA, as at the moment, every party need to retreat and consolidate its forces. And as ODM, they were doing that. They were now consolidating and focused on 2022 election. Now, when he said that, of course, why does he expect that these other parties would now just remain in NASA and not retreat and also consolidate themselves?
So as far as you're concerned, there's still some life.
There's still life in NASA. The problem is external forces.
I don't understand
first you need to make my brother declare his allegiance, his affiliation to Ford Kenya, so that he says he's actually speaking for Ford Kenya in this. Not necessarily. It's important.
Well, we know that most political alignments in Kenya, they say they're independent, but independent towards one side.
So that was important. But I think the question of whether NASA is dead, I think the question is when NASA will be buried. Because we know it died. When is the burial? When is the formal divorce likely to happen? Like I mentioned earlier, NASA was a special purpose vehicle that brought together people who were ideologically different, even based on their history and all that. But after the elections of 2017 were concluded, after the second election, and the handshake was actually the effective conclusion of elections, of 2017 elections. Then in terms of trying to reorganize and reposition themselves, because you remember, the handshake not only created discomfort within NASA, but also in Jubilee. As people look forward, we're looking at 2022. So what is happening is normal. The only issue is, because, Jubilee came together as a party, they merged and became a party, but NASA was still a coalition of parties that came together. That is what is causing the current, discomfort, because ODM still has the majority of parties. It means that they are able to, of seats, they are able to bully their junior partners. I know you may not be happy if I call them junior partners, but ODM is able to bully them, within even that arrangement. And I think one of the things we have always known, there was no code without ODM or without Raila. There was also no NASA without Raila. Mudavadi may have put together, NASA and coined the name, but without Raila, basically, it is very hard for NASA to, to be able to even forge their way forward. And I would actually advise it's a good thing for the other principles within the NASA coalition, for NASA to die, because it's the only way they are able to forge a new destiny, chart a new path for the 2022 elections, if they actually want to do that. Because what has happened, for example, for Kalonzo, and I pity him of all the NASA principles, he has always been in Raila's shadow for the longest time. And the day he is able to break free from that and, chart his own path, his own destiny, he will never actually imagine that. And what happens is, for example, if you look at Kalonzo, in 2002, when everybody was leaving Kanu to, to move to NACO or LDP, he hesitated by just a day. And the issue of coward, that tag started that time. Now, even after all these years, about, 15 years down the line, he's still struggling with the same issue of being indecisive. And why? Who has been the constant in all that equation? Raila Odinga. So I would say for NASA to die, perhaps it's a good thing for Kalonzo, it's a good thing for Mudavadi, it's a good thing for Wetangula, so that they're able now to think outside the NASA family, start charting a new path, engage with new people, because definitely we are going to see realignments.
All right, Bernard, NASA, or let me say the NASA principals, have a fantastic opportunity, according to some, for them to come out and now, stamp the authority and be known. And by this, I mean the three principals, Kalonzo Musyoka, Wetangula, and Mudavadi. But they still seem to be under the shadow of Raila.
At the moment, I think the focus is more on 2022 elections. When you look at these principles, the four principles, you realize that apart from the three, Raila is trying to reshape himself for 2022. And by working with the Jubilee, he knows very well that Uhuru's term is coming to an end. And endearing himself within the Jubilee circle, maybe he's thinking that he's going to inherit some of the support base of Raila. Let me not lie to Kenyans, to Uhuru. Let me not lie to Kenyans that what Raila is doing, the schemes he's doing, is just for the public interest or for the public good, is for his own interest. And in terms of when you look at the NASA arrangements, the other day there was a case in court pitting Sumra and Moade of Embakasi East. Yeah. Now, when the verdict was, when the ruling was made, the first thing we saw was a tweet from NASA, official handle of NASA, congratulating Sumra and saying that now NASA has a chance of winning that seat. These are two NASA siblings. These are two NASA children. Now, why would they, if at all that NASA is still a force that is controlled by the 3 or 4 parties, why do we have a Twitter handle giving statements?
Which is precisely why we're saying that there's a problem in NASA
and that's why I'm talking about external forces. That's why I think the 3 principles should come together, consolidate themselves, as Sam is saying, and provide the role of the opposition. Because when you look at Kalonzo, is still, he doesn't know where to.
Sure where he is.
Then Mudavadi is still holding on to the idea of NASA because he says that's his brainchild. And so far, he has not received any letter or an official communication from a party withdrawing, which is true. But again, can they come together and consolidate forces against, against the Jubilee and the ODM? Because ODM is now in Jubilee, is not in NASA.
And I'll need us to wind up because of time. Basically, what do you see on the political forefront, in the near future?
Well, of course, one of the things that is certain is that we are going to see a lot of realignments ahead of 2022. And I was going to say there's something the Deputy President, when he was touting NASA, especially Wetangula, he kept saying, lazima mjipange mapema. Because if you continue, dilly-dallying and playing around this, while for us, we are actually family focused and we are talking about 2022, then it may be too late for you to be able to, cobble together a vehicle that will help you run for elections. So I think what we're likely to see in the future, the realignments will happen, and they will happen around 2 individuals. One is Raila Odinga, basically whose shadow looms larger even in, in 2022. The other one is the Deputy President, William Ruto, who was also firmly set his sight on 2022. So going forward, we are likely to see a lot of realignments. You will see shifting loyalties around these 2 individuals who are going to be the major players. As for whether a third force will emerge, that is a conversation we have always tried to have over the years, and the third force never seems to emerge. So perhaps Kalonzo, Wetangula, Mudavadi, they are also likely to find their home within one of those 2 centers of power that are likely to emerge going forward.
All right, Bernard Yokoli, your closing comments.
Yeah, as Dr. is saying, I think the realignment is something that, we can't wish away. And it's good that people start preparing and organizing themselves as early as this, because the electoral cycle starts immediately you cast your vote. And when you start telling other politicians not to talk about, preparation for 2022, Actually, what we are saying is that you sleep as I prepare. And that's what we have been hearing from our purported partners. They talk about 2022, or they talk about other politicians not talking about 2022, but at the same time organizing themselves. So I think everybody, all political parties, should be given space to organize themselves as they march forward towards 2022. But again, we should not forget that there are things that we need to do as a country. The president has given us the 4-point agenda, that need to be achieved. So as we prepare ourselves and organize ourselves, let's not lose focus on the big four, ensure that we deliver. Because when we achieve those big four, that is for the benefit of all Kenyans, and also it will give the president a legacy of having achieved something. But let us not have the hyena mentality, thinking that when we achieve those big four, then it's going to benefit.
Well, if they deal with corruption, I think that will be a step forward. Gentlemen, we'll have to wind up right there. Thank you very much, Bernard Wakoli, who is a political analyst, and also Dr. Sam Kamau, who is a lecturer at the Aga Khan University on matters journalism and communication. Well, it is now 25 minutes to 8 and time for us to wind up this segment of the show. But Morning Express continues on the other side of the break. Let's look at some stories making headlines internationally. But we also have the entertainment segment lined up for you. Do stay with us right here on Morning Express.